it is no secret that 2022 was a historically bad year for video games, and let's face it, the last 10 years or so haven't been particularly great. So the prospect of trawling through the vast sea of mediocrity and atrocious video game releases just to identify those truly worthy dreadful titles that deserve particular praise for their finely crafted and optimised levels of failure might to some seem like an exhausting and demoralising task. But worry ye not, my brethren. Whilst the task might seem daunting to some, personally I was thoroughly looking forward to the experience. Because let's be honest here, 2022 was the gaming industry equivalent of the Squid Game for many publishers. And I found the levels of stupidity, hubris, failure and wokery to be very entertaining. Certainly more entertaining than most of the games. So off I set with a spring in my step and a warm optimistic glow in my black heart, with the challenge of finding the worst of the worst video games of the year. My methodology was actually very simple. I just took a master list of all the games released in 2022, I removed the 6 or so games that were not utter shit, got rid of all the 3 and 4 out of 10 games, which was most of them, and I was left with a list of worthy candidates that seemed capable of beating off the opposition for attaining the title of being deservedly and comprehensively shite. So without further ado, let's see the candidates for worst video game of 2022. Honourable mentions need to go to all yearly sports titles like FIFA, NBA, NFL and any video game gambling monstrosities out there that essentially masquerade as a sports title when really they are a gambling platform, where the results of your gambling are occasionally interrupted by episodic pay-to-win matches. In fact, the only good news to come out of this particularly fetid part of the video game industry's septic tank is that it looks like EA has actually lost the FIFA licence, which expired in 2022. Apparently FIFA looked at the many billions of dollars EA was making with the franchise and decided it didn't want to settle for being tossed peanuts when EA was walking away with the whole fucking plantation. But EA, being tightwads, didn't want to pony up more money for a licence renewal contract, and they lost it. Personally, I think this is a win all round. I think both organisations are money-grubbing fucks who screw every last penny out of football fans. So if they both failed, that's wonderful news. For any of you who live outside the UK, football is what other countries refer to as soccer. It's that game with the round ball, where everyone runs around on a pitch, throwing themselves on the ground and pretending to cry every time anyone so much as brushes up against them, so they can fool the referee into awarding a penalty. And when it's all over, both teams go to hotel rooms where they sexually assault unconscious teenage girls. Too harsh? Probably not. But in my defence, do I sound like someone who's into sport? If I had my way, the Olympics would only include activities that involved guns, bows or javelins, and I'd make the teams fight each other. I appreciate that some people are hooked on these sports titles because their passion is football or basketball or that thing with the wooden bats where they hit a ball instead of people, mostly. But just because you're hooked on something doesn't mean it's a good idea to do it. Lots of people are hooked on meth, and that's not a particularly positive and life-enhancing activity. Unless, of course, your aim in life is to give snaggle-toothed blowjobs to people in car parks in order to raise money for your addiction. These games should be rated 18 plus and come with a warning for gambling. Hopefully, that way children won't be targets of addiction-inducing technology, and by the time they're adults, hopefully they'll be smart enough to realise that pissing away your monthly earnings on loot box prizes that get reset every year is a terribly stupid thing to do indeed. Perhaps I'm being too hyperbolic, but given the current legal cases, government inquiries and criminal investigations going on into these loot box based gambling casinos, perhaps I'm not. So let's just say this. The companies that make these kinds of games care for you in the same way that Pfizer cares for you. They might make the right noises and pretend semi-convincingly But really it's just about the money, and they couldn't give a shit about whether or not you live or die, unless it affects their bottom line, of course. Diablo Immortal.
Holy shit, guys! This is 800% extra value? I'd be losing money if I didn't buy this!
Do you want to see your beloved franchise eviscerated and then smeared onto a mobile phone screen? Do you want to spend $110,000 maxing out your character because it's frankly not possible to do it within one lifetime unless you found a way to live for several centuries? Well, no, you don't. I don't. And it certainly appears that most other people don't either. Diablo Immortal is an utter disgrace. It's a pox on Activision Blizzard's house, and every single member of staff that supports these kinds of business models, publicly or privately, should be ashamed of themselves. They should go into their children's bedrooms tonight and tell their kids that whilst they're not quite as bad as a child murderer or evil cartoon villain, they are well on the road to getting there. These twats once got up on stage and exclaimed, "Do you guys not have phones?" Now the game is in the world, we know that really translates as, "Do you guys not have houses you can remortgage?" Because when the content in your game comes to a grand total of $110,000 and there is no way to grind it in real life, then frankly, as the great Chinese philosopher once said, get back on your donkey and get the fuck out of town. This entire project is finely honed, distilled psychological manipulation and gambling facilitation. It's disgusting, and it spits in the face of the franchise's loyal fans. And if this wasn't enough, now people are considering legal action against Activision Blizzard for false advertising because they did a bait and switch with their premium loot. They sold premium items that progressively nerf themselves as you level up, and instead of fixing the issue so they scale correctly or offering refunds, they were only prepared to change the text description retrospectively. Diablo Immortal is one of the biggest betrayals of a fan base since The Last of Us 2. It's like Activision Blizzard decided that doing a giant Cleveland steamer on their loyal long-term fans just wasn't enough. They wanted to shit on the chests, and then get the waiter to come over and hand them a bill for $100 grand. The levels of callous, sociopathic hubris involved with this entire project leaves me stunned. I mean, they got booed off stage at BlizzCon, memed into oblivion, and the reveal has gone down in history as one of the most disastrous product reveals ever. That should have been a clue, but no. They not only carried on, but they doubled down. At this point I doubt an actual riot, pitchforks, and possibly civil unrest would stop these arse clowns from trying to wedge games onto mobile and charge you a six-figure sum to complete them. These guys exist in their own moral dimension, and things are clearly done very differently there. Having Diablo Immortal on your CV or LinkedIn profile should be a mark of shame, right up there with a conviction for kidnapping a child from a playground or forcing themselves on the underage babysitter. There is no excuses or justification for this. This is simply adults predating on children whilst throwing their fans under the bus. Scorn. Heavily influenced and inspired by the artist H.R. Geiger, a man obsessed with vaginas, bodily orifices, penises, and the disgusting nature of the violence of impregnation and reproduction. Possibly he's doing it wrong. Just a thought. Therefore it should come as no surprise that Scorn isn't exactly what I would describe as a barrel of laughs. This was a victory of advertising over representativeness. I shit you not, I have spent years waiting for this game to finally come out, and it certainly did a good job of letting me and lots of other people incorrectly think it was like David Cronenberg took lots of drugs, got hired by id Studios and created a freakish, mind-bending alternative spin on the FPS genre by colliding the aesthetics of the chicken gun from Existence with the violent atmosphere of Doom, in order to create something so bleak and repulsive, it would make a chainsaw attack in a mortuary seem as pedestrian as a brony convention by comparison. Sadly, however, there was only one very teeny tiny catch. Scorn turned out to be a puzzle-based walking simulator set in the most depressing game environment imaginable. Well, that's a problem. I really wanted to like this game, I really wanted to review it, but after a few hours play, one of the puzzles broke and I couldn't backtrack or fix it or work around it, so I was facing going back and restarting a whole section again, and I just couldn't face it. I appreciate why some people might like this game and why some specific types of horror purists and hardcore puzzle fanatics might love it, but it just wasn't for me. I can't help but suspect that they must have realised that people were getting the wrong vibe from the promotion, and lots of people would assume this was not a very moody puzzle game. Surely. Scorn is not in and of itself a bad game, and it has found its own hardcore audience, but it's certainly a case of a game that was mismarketed, deliberately or accidentally, so I will hopefully try it again at some point in the future. Maybe. But I can appreciate why it broadsided a lot of players. Rainbow Six Extraction. Ubisoft is never shy about pushing back the boundaries of what is possible, especially when it comes to tedium, asset flipping, derivative spin-offs, world-class lack of imagination, and establishing a huge footprint for future monetization. Rainbow Six Extraction is a game that was so monumentally stale that it is already on offer for £7 from mainstream outlets, and for a £5 from less reputable key sellers. Fuck, I could probably get on the phone right now and persuade a random game shop to give me a free copy, and I'm being serious. Try it yourself if you don't believe me. Rainbow Six Extraction combines all the repetitive grindiness of The Division 2 with the piss poor low effort lack of support of The Division 1, all wrapped up in a small, slightly urine stained brown paper bag and tossed without any care, passion or conviction into the kind of online microtransaction megastore that we have become oh so familiar with when it comes to Ubisoft releases. You know the drill. They have about 2 developers working on the content and several floors of a building populated by monetization specialists and low-paid graphic artists pumping out cosmetic items for the in-game shop. It is hard to adequately quantify how shit this game truly is. Imagine someone giving you a desk ruler and then pointing at the moon and saying, "Measure that." One reviewer described this game as dead on arrival, which I think is a shockingly generous description. This was not dead on arrival, it was never alive. Rainbow Six Extraction was a Frankenstein of asset flipped parts, hacked off other Ubisoft products and quickly stitched together to roughly assemble a corpse in a rushed and ambitious attempt to pass off this fragmented cadaver as a legitimate body. It's basically a Rainbow Six Siege PvE spin-off cobbled together out of second-hand assets and served up with a fucking shop. This is a weak release, even by Ubisoft's weak standards. Obviously this game is organised around the principles of the in-game shop, it has premium currency, and now, thanks to Ubisoft formally announcing its cooperation with local police forces, it has the ability to get you arrested if you say mean words or offend someone's fifis, because Ubisoft are proudly announcing that they're going to start reporting toxic players to the cops. And when I say proudly, we are obviously talking about pride with a capital flag. Ubisoft are absolute scum and treat their players like shit. We already knew that, but soon they will be sending some of us off to jail too. I mean, fuck these guys. For many years I've been telling anyone that would listen that Ubisoft is just as evil as EA or Activision, but somehow everyone has been giving them a hall pass. And it was only a few months ago that I warned about human rights and civil liberties threats presented by operations like Defence Matrix and the Fair Play Alliance. Now here we are, with a game with voice over IP, where they will record you swearing at people, and if you drop the wrong word, the police will be banging on your door with a warrant for your arrest. That's pretty rich coming from a corporation that had to fire 1/3 of its senior executives over allegations that they had spent over a decade operating an HR-run sexual assault facilitation operation within the company. Allegedly. When the good ship Ubisoft finally crashes into the iceberg of inevitable corporate failure and people start asking, how the hell did that happen? Just snigger and point to these sexual assaults, harassment charges, HR cover-up, mass resignations, and grooming reports. Then point at Rainbow Six Extraction, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, Riders Republic, Far Cry 6. Callisto Protocol. Back in the good old 1980s, the era of optimism, Ronald Reagan, and peak popular music, the British Armed Forces introduced its new domestically produced, brilliantly designed battle rifle, the SA-80.
Can you hear that? I can hear it. That's the sound of every former British service member cringing at the mere sight of this rifle, and it's so loud you can hear it over the internet.
It was the result of decades of careful and ambitious development, with the goal of creating a world-leading, high-tech, lightweight, compact, British-made weapon that would see the armed forces well into the next century, and possibly become a world-leading weapons export. The SA-80 was frankly a work of literal genius. It sported an ingenious bullpup configuration to reduce its length without shortening the barrel. It featured stamped metal parts to reduce manufacturing time and production costs. It was a simple to make, highly compact, incredibly accurate rifle that had all the benefits of a long gun, but a form factor so compact it was suited for close quarters combat, such as house clearing. Frankly, on paper, it was a damn work of art. It did, however, have one minor drawback, that some of the soldiers using it were very slightly unhappy about. When you pulled on the trigger bit here, there was no guarantee that bullets would come out of the pointy end here. Now, any gun owners, gunsmiths and weapon designers watching this video might immediately jump to the reckless conclusion that not reliably firing when you pull the fucking trigger might be considered to be a design flaw. And yes, you would indeed be correct. Now don't misunderstand me, that wasn't the only thing wrong with the SA-80. It had a frightening habit of, well, falling to bits. Parts would break, snap off, break off, fall out and generally fail. The magazine would frequently get very upset about being wedged into the magazine housing for long periods of time and would routinely exploit every opportunity to make a break for freedom by jumping out and landing on the ground. Oh, and it was also discovered during the Gulf War that insect repellent would melt all the plastic parts. Winning. I myself am not an expert on firearms, but even from my limited experience as a keyboard warrior and my long and distinguished career in the 101st Chairborne Division, even I strongly suspect that the primary requirement of a rifle of war is that when you pull on the curly metal switch bit here, fiery magical pew pew stuff comes out here. Basically, the designers had become so obsessed with the features, they forgot the primary purpose of the entire exercise. As it was with the SA-80, so it is with the Callisto Protocol. The Callisto Protocol is a highly ambitious sci-fi horror game with stunning art design, superb atmospherics, and it raises the bar on in-game death scene animations. It is truly a sight to behold and draws on the legacy of Dead Space and is even directed by Dead Space series co-creator Glenn Schofield. Unfortunately, however, it slightly sucked balls to play at launch. They had obsessed so relentlessly about the visuals, the atmosphere and the cinematic death scenes, they seem to have momentarily forgotten that this is supposed to be a game, and the game part of this game was, well, a bit shit. Janky combat, unskippable cutscenes, balked save points, save scumming traps, and Ubisoft levels of no fucks given non-optimization, and everyone was complaining about the dreadful combat system. What was intended to be one of the scariest and cinematically impressive horror games since Dead Space ended up being a jittery, infuriating and frequently frustrating experience, with a combat system that appeared, at least, like nobody had actually tested it. I am sure that just like the SA-80, after years of hotfixes, patches, modifications and changes, it would eventually become the revolutionary design they set out to make. So do yourself a favour, skip it for now, wait 6 months, buy it on a massive discount, when they have unfucked it. The Callisto protocol had lofty ambitions and insane hype. Sadly, however, it didn't appear to have a producer prepared and present to breathe down the game director's neck and ask him awkward questions about why the game bit of his game was being neglected. Saints Row. Sometimes a game is coming out and I'm honestly tempted to review it, but long before the train wreck ploughs into the station, you can already spot the burning train, billowing smoke and fire, with passengers jumping out of the windows when it's still miles outside of town. Saints Row 2022 was such a game. Whether it be the leaks, press releases or early teaser trailers, everything about this game reeked of woke tardery and the death of a franchise. This game is what happens when you take a franchise that is loved for one set of reasons, then you sign up to your ESG reporting system, replace all the core elements of the game with wokery, and pump out a low-effort anti-Christ version of your original beloved Angel. The game telegraphed its shitness from the other side of the planet. But I decided not to review it for several reasons. I never played the other Saints Row games, God forgive me. Because of this, I couldn't make a reasonable comparison. You could tell from the trailer and the general uproar and indignation that this was going to be a franchise annihilating Last of Us 2 affair. Just didn't feel that there was much need for me to rock up with no authority, no prior experience of Saints Row, just to stand over a corpse and announce, "Yep, it's dead," just like the last 100 people have just said. The one upside of not having played any of the prior Saints Row games is that at least I didn't feel like my childhood gaming memories were being crushed in front of my eyes, and I dodged the bullet of experiencing a bunch of no-talent writers wrecking something that used to be great. I watched some playthroughs and cutscenes, and the best thing I can say about the dialogue is this. Some of the writers appeared to have at least a basic grasp of English. None of it was funny, none of it was intelligent. It showed clear signs that they were all laughing at their own jokes in the writing pool, and it never occurred to them to see how normal people might react to this shit dialogue. Well, they know now. Saints Row is what happens when you take a beloved franchise, reimagine it for modern audiences, of I assume cretins and permanently online attention seekers. You recruit your writers from Instagram, you make sure that anyone with an ounce of talent is fired, you remove the carbon monoxide detectors from the office. You make sure that no one has any sense of humour. This game is terrible. Watching 1 hour of a Let's Play will hammer that memo to your skull with a 6-inch nail. Oh, and did I mention that just to make sure there wasn't any aspect of the game that they hadn't ruined, they made it an Epic Game Store exclusive too. Twats. Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2.
Pre-order now and get early access to the open beta.
There are very few certainties in life. Any project involving Neil Druckmann will be woke. All the data you share on TikTok goes straight to the CCP. Anyone who puts their pronouns in their bio does not support freedom of speech. And every year, the world's most infamous FPS video game rug pull will occur. A joyous, yearly festival where Activision takes away all that stuff you bought or earned last year and replaces your game with stuff you have to buy or earn this year. And you have to pay for the privilege. This time around, however, was not only a remarkably soulless and vapid Call of Duty effort, but they boasted a lack of readiness and completion unrivalled by even the most unserviceable of live service video games. Maybe because they'd spent so much time rolling out spyware, player reporting systems and egregious customer surveillance to increase their ESG rating, in Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 they actually forgot to introduce most basic functionality at launch and had to quietly spend the first month furtively squatting in the naughty corner trying to quietly shart out some of the literally most mundane and basic elements of the game that were shockingly missing at launch, whilst hoping that nobody would hear them pop. At launch they didn't even have leaderboards, challenges or player stats, and just to add insult to injury, it crashed all the bloody time. In Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, you plunge yourself into the shadowy, murky world of global espionage, covert surveillance, and international intrigue. You play the part of a video game customer who has to navigate the seemingly simple job of buying a damn video game without becoming the victim of a global conspiracy to manipulate, monitor, and grass you up to the police. Boasting an AI-driven covert monitoring system, deploying automated algorithmic speech recognition and recording mechanisms, all seamlessly integrated into a pan-global network of companies and non-governmental agencies, yet somehow, despite all this bleeding-edge technology, still couldn't manage to get the fucking anti-cheat to work properly, despite accidentally banning thousands of players for absolutely no reason at all. This was a game that launched in such a weak state that the devs were actually begging online for an award. A game that rolled out Defense Matrix, a game that literally tells you off and spanks you on the botty before you've even started playing by making you sign behavioural compliance contracts. Because apparently, being rude in an online shooter is vastly more horrible than spying, unauthorised data harvesting, sharing your information with Communist China and keeping voice recordings of you on insecure servers, and then sharing them with other organisations entirely without any formal accountability. Let's not forget what the real crimes and abuses are here. Saying naughty words and hurting people's fifis is the big ticket item, not the wholesale assault on your civil liberties and human fucking rights. You know all that shit that Facebook is being prosecuted for? Well, apparently nobody seems to mind when Activision does 10 times worse. Perhaps Bobby Kotick just assassinated the right people, or strangled the requisite number of prostitutes on Epstein Island. Allegedly. Who knows? But this week he threatened the whole of the UK government, so he clearly doesn't feel intimidated by anyone. Defense Matrix, which comes with this game, is an absolute abomination. Making customers sign contracts exposing them to more legal liability than the vendor is disgraceful. Refusing to handle customer complaints and stoically not answering the telephone to deal with refund requests is appalling and possibly illegal. A game that makes you promise to behave under the threat of confiscating your property is farcical. A game that launched with nearly all player calling cards being gay pride flags is almost certainly in violation of Activision's own rules about politicisation. Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 represents everything that is evil, pernicious and ESG compliant about the AAA video game industry. It is literally what the World Economic Forum spends millions of dollars a year researching with research grants. Ways to turn video games into a psyops mechanism for manipulating society, and they can frankly get to fuck.
Games are good for persuading people to see the world in a different way.
So my question for you is, how can video games become the next persuasive medium for addressing complex social issues?
I use the name persuasive game to describe a video game that's used to present them with a situation or an idea that they hadn't considered.
I made a whole video about SMS Protect, Defense Matrix, and the digital gamer ID implications of these systems, and their affiliation with the shady Fair Play Alliance, and all the long list of lying and bullshitting Activision has done to justify all this crap. Their job is to make a video game, make sure it works, sell it, and then fuck off. Nobody asked them nor gave them permission to turn video games into social monitoring and manipulation platforms that harvest your data and share that data with external entities. Be that some shady WEF front company or fucking China. The big war map mode was pretty good though. I really enjoyed camping at the back in the light tank and shooting into the enemy spawn points. So that was nice. Overwatch 2. The entire Overwatch 2 fiasco is a baffling clusterfuck of such epic proportions that I struggle to make sense of it. This entire scenario makes about as much pragmatic sense as a guy walking into an accident and emergency department with a fragmentation grenade wedged up his arse and announcing to the nearest doctor that the grenade is still stuck, but look, I managed to pull the pin out. I can only speculate about the intent here, so here goes. Possibly the Overwatch 2 scandal might be a bait and switch gone wrong. Perhaps at one point early on they had some clever master plan. Maybe they wanted to rug pull their audience, make them pay for a whole new game a second time, take away all their microtransactions, force them to buy all new cosmetics and effectively reset everyone's progress to zero so they could fleece them all a second time over. But this is the part where things go all on the piss. In order to increase their reach and legitimise even more egregious monetisation, they switched to a free-to-play monetisation model, so no double billing for the game. In order to avoid impending and future legal complications, they decided to drop loot boxes altogether and instead replace them with insanely overpriced cosmetic outfits. Then, in what seems like a last-minute decision, or 11th hour reprieve, they announced that players could merge their Overwatch 1 account with their Overwatch 2 account and carry over skins and progress, but not some currencies apparently. Now I can't believe they did any of the non-evil stuff out of the goodness of their hearts, and the aggregate result appears to be a string of massive own goals, and it all doesn't neatly fit into any sensible logical narrative. They basically took a game that everyone loved and forced them to play its sequel which everyone didn't love. Shut down all the Overwatch 1 servers so nobody had a choice but to switch over, and this all seems to be motivated by the desire to fleece the players for every single penny they are worth. Only at the last minute they made a huge bunch of concessions, possibly due to potential backlash, which kind of ruined their evil money grubbing plans. Don't get me wrong, Overwatch 2 still has ridiculously overpriced shit cosmetics, so they are still fleecing the players, but certainly not to the extent that they could have done, and it's all very, very odd. Maybe this is a string of conflicting decisions made by committee, or they are playing some kind of very clever long con here, but one thing is certain, Overwatch 1 was a very well loved and meme-worthy video game phenomenon, and they knocked that house down and rebuilt it, for no logical reason, and the sequel basically just isn't as good. Frankly, I have no clue what is going on here. If you do, please let me know in the comment section. The Last of Us Part 1 Remastered. A monument to how AAA publishers have run out of ideas, imagination or morals. It was nominated for several grown-up awards, as if it was anything other than a remaster. This should have been a free upgrade for anyone who owns the original game, and let's not forget that this is a remaster of the original game. If you're a hardcore fan of this game, this might be your third different version. Just exactly how many times do they expect people to keep paying full price for this? What can I say? Modders push out high-def graphical upgrade packs for video games for free, but Sony and Naughty Dog shart out this reboot and demand 70 fucking quid. And what do we get for that? A slightly less clunky interface? A few sound effects? Uglier NPCs? One woman in The Last of Us seems to be aging with every remaster faster than she would in real life. I'm all for these remasters, but not charging the existing customers full whack for them. If someone comes around and paints my walls, I'll pay decorators rates. But don't come around, splash up a bit of trade paint and then charge me for a whole new house. 70 quid? They are taking the fucking piss. Fallout 76. You either die a hero, or live long enough to see someone wreck your favourite franchise. As a huge fan of Fallout, it is hard to adequately describe the levels of disgust and disdain I felt when this game launched. Now I know what you're thinking. Fallout 76 was released on the 23rd of October 2018. Why am I bringing it up again now? Well, I'm bringing this up now because some games are so fucking terrible that they transcend time, and they are such egregious and cynical abuses of trust that it is important that we never forget. With Starfield coming out soon, it's the season for shitweasel Todd Little Lies Howard to slither out onto stage yet again and pump your head full of his procedurally generated bullshit. So I thought it doubly important to bring up Fallout 76, just as a little gentle reminder that Todd Howard would piss in a cup and tell you it's beer, then spend years telling you it's lovely beer, right up to the moment that you've paid for it, you've taken a sip, spat it out across the bar, and then, only then, after all the years of lying, once you realise it was piss, he would get up on stage, make jokes about it being a rocky launch, and promise to fix the brewery and make the piss taste a bit more like beer over the first year.
Great to see everybody. We have had an incredibly exciting year at Bethesda Game Studios. Given some of that excitement, impressed you're still here.
So put this date in your diary, 23rd of October, and every year on the anniversary of this shitburger, remind yourself that Todd Howard is a cup of piss salesman. And never forget you should let someone else taste the beer first, because if he says it's tasty, it almost certainly is not. And hopefully this will help you hold off from pre-ordering Starfield at some point later this year.
We're creating a new universe with Starfield. Set hundreds of years in our future, it's an epic about hope, our shared humanity, and answering our greatest mystery. It's a game we've dreamt of playing, and it wasn't until now that we have the hardware, the technology, and the team who's hard at work at home to make that dream a reality. We're excited to finally share our first in-game teaser and something to look forward to.
So I guess it's time to hitch this noose up and get ready for a good hanging. Having to pick a worst game of the year out of this lot feels a bit like liberating a Nazi concentration camp and then being told that I can only send one of the prison guards to the Nuremberg trials. Obviously, most of them deserve a short rope and a rickety wooden chair to stand on. There might be a few nice ones that smuggled in bread for the prisoners and helped some of them escape, but largely most of them deserve what's coming. So that's the same approach I'm going to take here. The Callisto protocol gets a reprieve because despite all its problems, its main failures were the result of failures. Failures in leadership primarily, but also in design. They did not appear at least to be operating under malicious intent. They just seemed to have disappeared up their own arses for a while and completely lost perspective. Similarly, Scorn gets to walk home unmolested too. Despite all of that game's issues, it was at least a legitimate passion project, genuinely creative, and mainly suffered from misrepresenting the genre and style of gameplay. Maybe they shat the bed at the idea of admitting it was a puzzle game. I mean, their Steam description seems pretty sparse, so I can't help but suspect they self-consciously knew they were being a bit saucy. But it's not entirely badly received. It's found its niche audience, and at least it didn't have shit like loot boxes. Although if Scorn did have loot boxes, I'm sure they'd be hilarious. They'd be designed like an alien egg with a hole like a H.R. Geiger vagina, and you'd have to reach in shoulder deep to pull out your prize, like a cow vet checking a cow's lady parts. These two games aside, everyone else can get on the back of the truck, because we're heading off to the burial pits. Smoke 'em if you've got 'em, because this is going to be a short ride and we don't have time or inclination for any last words. Seriously, all the other games deserve the title of Worst Game of the Year so they can all share that award. I wouldn't want any of them to feel they hadn't been recognised for their own failures. Now would I? 2022 was a shit pie for gamers, but I have no doubt that it was a highly lucrative year for publishers. It always is. As the monetisation ramps up, the arse falls out of the quality control departments, and publishers invest more heavily into mobile games and eastern markets, I'm sure it was a perfectly bonza year for them. Although I'm sure they will still make lots of redundancies in 2023. It's worth noting though, that at least smaller non-AAA games are starting to deliver. Sure, some of them are complicated regarding their finance, and I know factually that publishers are abusing the early access / crowdfunding business model now, but thus far at least, they have produced some pretty decent games, and they're cheap at least. And following from this, and I don't know why, but I'm actually strangely optimistic for the non-AAA video game industry in 2023. I'm sure I will regret saying that at some point, but I think at least some parts of the industry has finally realised that people prefer a good £20 game over a shit £70 game full of microtransactions. Go figure. Apparently they have smart people working for them, and it's taken them years to figure this shit out. Marvellous. But as much as I would love to stay and talk all night, sadly I have to head off to Hogwarts to start my wizard training. Hopefully all that time spent playing The Division will give me a head start. But for now, good luck and happy hunting.